Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Space Channel. Tonight, something that every person who has ever lived past the age of 20 has felt, without exception, without variation, without any obvious explanation being offered at the moment it begins to happen. The years are getting shorter, not in any measurable clock-based sense. The hours still contain 60 minutes. The days still contain 24 hours. The years still contain 365 days. Unchanged, reliable, identical in length to every year that came before. And yet, something is happening to the way those years feel. Something quiet and persistent and unmistakable. A slow acceleration in the passage of experienced time that has been noticed by every generation of human beings that has ever been old enough to compare their present to their past. When you were very young, a single summer could feel infinite. The stretch from one birthday to the next felt almost impossibly long. A year so enormous that the end of it was nearly unimaginable from the beginning. And then, somewhere along the way, without any announcement, without any clear turning point, the years began to move faster. Not all at once. Slowly, imperceptibly, the way a river picks up speed before it reaches a fall. So gradually that no single moment marks the change, but the difference, looking back across years, is undeniable. Tonight we will walk through why this happens, what the brain is actually doing when it compresses an entire year into what feels like weeks, and what the most recent science says about the machinery behind this most universal of human experiences. If you find these explorations worth your time, a like or a subscribe helps the channel reach others who do. Thank you for being here. But for the next 2 hours, none of this is something you need to hold. Settle in. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breathing slow. Let the day fade away. Let's begin. Begin with the simplest version of the experience, the one that needs no explanation to be recognized. Think back to the last time you felt a year was truly long. For most people, this memory places itself somewhere in childhood, somewhere in the years when school marked the calendar, when summer was not simply a season, but an entire era, a continent of time unto itself, seemingly endless, seemingly inexhaustible. A child waiting for a birthday, or for Christmas, or for the last day of school, is not simply impatient in the way adults are impatient. The child is waiting across a proportion of time so large, relative to everything they have yet experienced, that the waiting is genuinely difficult, genuinely taxing. The thing being waited for is not merely distant in calendar terms. It is distant in the only terms that the brain actually uses to measure distance in time, which are not objective at all, but deeply, fundamentally personal. And now consider the adult version of the same experience. A year passes. A December arrives. And with it, the particular disorientation of wondering where the year went. The feeling that it was only recently that the previous December was here. The sense that something has accelerated without permission, without warning, without any corresponding change in the number of hours in the day or the number of days in the year. Everything external is identical. The clocks are the same. The calendar has not been modified. And yet the experience is profoundly, undeniably different. Something inside has changed. Something in the way the brain handles time has shifted, producing a sensation so universal that it transcends culture, language, geography, and personal circumstance. Across the entire breadth of human experience, people age and time accelerates. Not the clock, the felt experience of it. Worth a few unhurried sentences here is the distinction between two completely different things that we sometimes treat as if they were the same thing. the measurement of time, and the experience of time. These two things are related, but they are not identical, and confusing them is the source of most of the puzzlement surrounding tonight's exploration. Measuring time is what clocks do. A clock counts oscillations. A mechanical clock counts the swings of a pendulum. A quartz clock counts the vibrations of a crystal. An atomic clock counts the transitions of electrons between energy levels in a particular kind of atom. None of these mechanisms has anything to do with consciousness, with attention, with memory, with novelty, with dopamine, with age, or with any of the factors that determine how long a given span of time feels to a human being. A clock ticks at the same rate on a boring Tuesday and on the most extraordinary day of anyone's life. It ticks at the same rate when you are 10 years old and when you are 80. It is completely indifferent to the experience of the person in whose presence it runs. Experiencing time is what the brain does. And the brain, unlike a clock, does not count oscillations. It has no pendulum, no crystal, no atomic transition to measure against. The brain's sense of how much time has passed is constructed from something far messier and far more interesting. The density of distinct, remembered experiences within a given span of time, the amount of new information processed and stored, the chemical environment in which the processing takes place, and the proportion that any given span of time represents relative to the total time the brain has already lived through. All of these factors shift continuously across a human lifetime, and each shift changes the felt experience of duration without changing the clock by even a single second. The first and most immediately intuitive explanation for why time feels faster as we age is the one most people reach for when they think about it directly: the proportional explanation. It is worth sitting with carefully, because while it captures something genuinely true, it is not the whole story, and some of its implications are stranger than they first appear. The proportional explanation works like this. The brain does not experience each year of life in isolation. It experiences each year against the backdrop of every year that came before it. The felt duration of any given span of time is partly determined by how large that span is relative to the total time already lived. For a child of 5, a single year represents 1/5 of their entire life. It is not just long in calendar terms. It is long as a proportion of everything the child has ever experienced. A year at that age is genuinely enormous, a span of time that encompasses nearly as much personal history as the child can remember. Waiting through it is waiting through something that represents, in terms of the child's own timeline, a very significant fraction of their entire world. For a person of 50, a single year represents 1/50th of their life, 1/50th of all the accumulated experience stored in memory, 1/50th of a self that has been building for half a century. The year is no longer long in the proportional sense, even though it is exactly the same length by the clock. It is a small fraction of a long history, the way a single paragraph is a small fraction of a long book. Not because the paragraph contains fewer words, but because the book is so much longer. By the time a person reaches 80, a single year is 1/80th of a life, a fraction so small that the simple weight of all that has come before compresses it into something that can feel, retrospectively, almost like a brief chapter in a very long story. This proportional compression follows a mathematical pattern that has been studied carefully. The relationship between age and felt duration is not linear. It is closer to logarithmic, meaning that each successive decade of life does not feel the same length as the one before, but instead feels progressively shorter, with the compression accelerating as total age increases. By some estimates, the 5 years between the ages of 5 and 10 feel roughly as long, in terms of subjective duration, as the 40 years between the ages of 40 and 80. This is a striking claim, and it carries a weight that is worth feeling for a moment. The entire stretch of middle and later adulthood, compressed into something that, subjectively, takes no longer to live through than a child's 5 years of early schooling. Not because less happens, but because the proportion has shifted so dramatically that the same calendar time now occupies a far smaller fraction of everything that has come before it. But the proportional explanation, accurate as it is in capturing something real about the phenomenon, does not explain all of what is happening. It describes the pattern without fully explaining the mechanism. The deeper mechanism involves not the mathematics of proportion, but the biology of how the brain processes, stores, and later retrieves the experiences that constitute a remembered life. The brain does not record experience the way a video camera records footage. It does not capture every moment with equal fidelity and store it in a continuous, uncompressed archive. Instead, it is selective, highly selective, filtering out enormous amounts of the raw data flowing through the senses at every moment, and retaining only what it flags as worth retaining. The primary criterion the brain uses to decide what is worth retaining is novelty. New information, unfamiliar patterns, experiences that do not match any existing template in memory. These are the things the brain processes most thoroughly, attends to most carefully, and stores most durably. Familiar information, routine patterns, experiences that closely match countless previous experiences. These are handled with far less processing power. They are recognized, categorized, and largely filtered out, handled by the autopilot regions of the brain without demanding the full attention of the systems that build lasting memories. This selectivity is enormously efficient and enormously important. It is the reason humans can perform complex, automated tasks like driving a familiar route or following a daily routine without dedicating conscious attention to every detail. The brain has already processed these environments thoroughly in the past, stored the relevant templates, and can now handle them with a fraction of the processing resources it would need for something genuinely new. This efficiency is a feature, not a flaw. And in the short term, it is experienced simply as the comfortable ease of the familiar. But the long-term consequence of this efficiency is exactly what tonight is concerned with. When the brain processes an experience deeply, storing many distinct, richly encoded memories of it, the later recall of that period feels long. When it processes an experience shallowly, storing few distinct memories, the later recall of that period feels short, compressed, blurred into something that can be difficult to distinguish from neighboring periods. A week in a foreign country, full of new sights and unfamiliar patterns and experiences that demand full processing power, feels, in retrospect, like a very long week. A month of familiar routine, efficiently handled by autopilot, feels in retrospect like it was over, almost before it began. The clock measured both spans accurately. The memory stores them very differently. And it is the memory, not the clock, that determines how long each span feels when it is looked back upon. Childhood is rich with novelty, in a way that is almost impossible to sustain into adulthood. Not because adults are less capable of curiosity, but because the sheer number of things encountered for the first time declines so dramatically across the course of a life. A child of 5 is encountering first experiences at an extraordinary rate. First friendships, first days of school, first understanding of how money works, first long journey, first awareness of seasons, first experience of loss, first discovery of a beloved book or film or piece of music. Each of these first experiences demands full processing power, full attention, full encoding into memory. Each of them is genuinely novel in a way that nothing in later life, with very few exceptions, can quite replicate. By the time a person is 30, the vast majority of the categories of experience they will ever encounter have already been encountered. This is not a statement about boredom or diminishment. It is simply a fact about the nature of novelty. There are only so many first-time experiences available in a human life, and most of them cluster in the early years. What follows is not repetition in any insulting sense, but it is familiarity, and familiarity is processed differently. The brain of a 30-year-old does not approach a new month the way the brain of a 5-year-old approaches a new month. It approaches it with an enormous archive of prior months, an automatic categorization system that handles most of what the new month contains without needing to flag it as worth storing in detail. The month passes. The memories formed are fewer, less richly encoded, harder to distinguish from neighboring months. And when the year is looked back upon, it feels shorter than it was. The second wrong turn worth examining here is the idea that this is simply a matter of attention and could be corrected by paying more attention, by being more mindful, by deliberately choosing to notice more of what passes through daily experience. This is partly true, and the practical implications of it are real, but it misses something important about the biological basis of what is happening, something that goes deeper than habits of attention. Research using brain imaging technology has revealed a specific neural mechanism underlying the acceleration of subjective time with age. In a study that used an Alfred Hitchcock television episode, chosen precisely because it causes the brains of almost all viewers to fire in similar patterns of activity as the story unfolds, scientists examined how the brains of people, ranging from young adults to elderly participants, processed the same 8 minutes of continuous narrative. They were looking for what researchers call neural state transitions, moments when the pattern of brain activity shifts distinctly from one configuration to another, marking a new segment of experience, a new mental moment in the unfolding story. What they found was striking. Younger participants showed more frequent transitions between these neural states, more distinct mental moments within the same 8-minute span. Older participants showed fewer transitions, less differentiated neural states, a smoother, less segmented processing of the same continuous experience. In terms of the brain's internal structure of time, the younger participants were making more cuts in the film of their experience, and the older participants were making fewer. The film was the same. The number of cuts differed. This finding connects to a broader process called neural dedifferentiation, a gradual change in how the aging brain organizes its activity, with different brain regions becoming less specifically responsive to different kinds of input, their responses blurring and overlapping in ways that reduce the sharpness of distinction between one experience and the next. It is not simply that older people pay less attention. Their brains are genuinely processing experience differently, making fewer distinct internal records of each passing span of time, and producing, as a consequence, a felt duration that is compressed relative to what the clock recorded. There is another layer to this story, one that involves a chemical messenger whose name has become well known in popular discussions of mood and motivation, but whose role in time perception is less commonly appreciated. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter most associated with reward, pleasure and the anticipation of good things turns out to be deeply involved in the brain's internal clock, the mechanism that tracks the passage of time, moment to moment. Research has established that dopamine neurons control time judgment in a direct and measurable way. When dopamine activity is high, time seems to move more slowly from the inside. Each moment feels more distinct, more richly detailed, more extended. When dopamine activity is low, time seems to move faster. Moments blur together. The granularity of experienced time decreases. This is why highly engaging, rewarding experiences, which produce significant dopamine release, tend to feel very long in the moment, even though they often feel short in retrospect. And it is part of why boredom, which is associated with low dopamine and low engagement, produces the peculiar sensation of time stretching out to an almost unbearable length. The dopamine connection matters for tonight's exploration, because dopamine release in response to novelty declines with age. Not because older people are incapable of experiencing reward, but because the brain's dopamine system is specifically tuned to respond to the unexpected, to experiences that violate predictions and deliver something new. As life accumulates and the archive of prior experience grows, fewer things are genuinely unexpected. Fewer things trigger the same magnitude of dopamine response that novelty reliably produces in younger brains. The internal clock runs more quickly. The moments are less distinct, and the years accelerate. This is why a child's experience of time and an adult's experience of time can differ so dramatically, even when the external circumstances are nearly identical. The child's brain is drenched in the dopamine of genuine novelty, processing each hour with the heightened attention and rich encoding that a high dopamine environment supports. The adult's brain, in a familiar routine, is operating in a lower dopamine environment, ticking through familiar territory with efficient autopilot, making fewer marks in the record of the day. The clock runs at exactly the same speed. The internal experience diverges dramatically. There is a further piece of the mechanism that connects back to how memory constructs the felt length of a period of time. A piece that has particular relevance for the way we experience not single days, but whole years when we look back on them. The brain does not recall the past in the way it might be imagined to, as a continuous, evenly lit replay of stored footage. It recalls the past through landmarks, through the distinct, richly encoded experiences that have been flagged as memorable and stored in enough detail to be retrieved with something resembling clarity. The felt length of a past period is not determined by how many hours it contained, but by how many distinct, retrievable memories it produced. A period packed with memorable events, new places, meaningful conversations, unusual experiences, feels long in retrospect because the memory has many distinct, well-encoded landmarks to traverse when it reconstructs that period. A period of uniform routine, however many calendar days it occupied, feels short because the memory has few distinct landmarks, and the reconstruction of it is correspondingly brief. This is the mechanism behind an observation that almost everyone who has ever taken a holiday will recognize. 2 weeks in an unfamiliar place, full of new experiences, new food, new people, new landscapes, can feel when it is over like it lasted much longer than 2 weeks. A month of ordinary life, running its familiar patterns, can feel, in retrospect, like it was over in days. The asymmetry is striking enough that many people find themselves surprised by it. The 2 weeks away felt longer than the month at home, despite being objectively shorter. This is not an error. It is the brain accurately reporting the density of distinct, retrievable memories within each span. There are simply more memorable moments in 2 weeks of genuine novelty than in a month of familiar routine. Now step back and consider what this means across the arc of a whole life. Childhood is dense with first experiences, each one demanding full processing and producing a rich, distinct memory. The years of early life are, in memory, disproportionately long because they are disproportionately full of memories relative to their calendar length. This is why childhood, looking back from adulthood, can seem to have lasted a very long time, even though it occupied only the earliest fraction of total years lived. The memories are dense, distinct, richly encoded, and the reconstruction of that period is correspondingly extended. Adolescence adds another layer of rich, distinct experience, the intense social novelty of early relationships, the discovery of identity, the particular quality of first loves and first heartbreaks, and first independent choices. These too are encoded richly, stored densely, and recalled at length. Then adulthood arrives, and with it the particular efficiency of the routinized brain. Not a loss of capacity, not a diminishment of experience, but a shift in how experience is processed toward the efficient handling of the familiar and away from the deep encoding of the genuinely new. The years that follow, by some accounts the most productive and meaningful years of a life, are paradoxically the ones that feel shortest in retrospect, not because less happens in them, but because less of what happens is genuinely new, and less of the genuinely new is processed deeply enough to become a distinct, retrievable memory. There is a perspective shift available here, the same kind of perspective shift that previous evenings have found illuminating when considering things whose apparent simplicity dissolves on closer examination. The acceleration of subjective time with age has often been discussed as if it were purely a loss, a diminishment, something to be mourned or resisted. And there is certainly a quality of loss in the feeling that the years are shortening, in the particular disorientation of December arriving again before January seems properly finished. But considered from a different angle, the phenomenon reveals something about the extraordinary density of early human experience, something that might be understood as a feature rather than only a defect of the aging brain. The child experiences time as long because their brain is doing something extraordinarily labor-intensive, processing an entirely new world in enormous detail, building the foundations of all future understanding, constructing from scratch the frameworks that will allow the adult brain to function with such remarkable efficiency. Later, every day of early childhood is an extraordinary cognitive achievement, a full immersion in genuine novelty that demands and receives the full resources of a brain operating at maximum encoding capacity. The slowness of early time is the felt signature of this extraordinary cognitive labor. The efficiency of adult time perception, the speed with which years seem to pass, is the felt signature of how completely that early labor succeeded. The adult brain has built so thorough a model of the world that it can move through most experiences with minimal additional processing, recognizing, categorizing, and handling them with a fraction of the resources that novelty once demanded. This efficiency is what allows adults to function as adults, to manage complex lives with large amounts of simultaneous responsibility, to hold jobs and relationships and social obligations without being overwhelmed by the cognitive load of processing every new piece of information, as if encountering it for the first time. The very success of early learning produces the spirit of later time. Now turn to what can be done, not in the sense of reversing the process, which is not possible, but in the sense of working with it, of understanding enough about the mechanism to find, within ordinary life, the conditions that restore something of the density of early time, the richness of encoding that makes a given span of time feel long and full, rather than compressed and quickly passed. The most direct implication of everything explored so far is that novelty, genuine novelty, is the key variable. Not manufactured excitement or deliberate thrill-seeking, but the simple experience of encountering something the brain has not previously categorized and stored. Something that requires real attention, real processing, real engagement with unfamiliar material. Research consistently shows that new experiences, new environments, new skills, new relationships all produce something closer to the childhood density of memory formation. All expand the felt duration of the time that contains them. This does not require dramatic change. The brain's novelty response is sensitive enough to be triggered by small differences. A different route to a familiar destination, a conversation with an unfamiliar person, an afternoon spent trying something the hands have never tried before. None of these things can fully replicate the experience of genuine first-time novelty, but all of them move the brain slightly away from its most efficient autopilot mode and back toward the more engaged, more deeply encoding state that produces richer memories and felt longer time. Mindful attention produces a related effect through a different route. When attention is deliberately directed toward the details of an experience that would otherwise be handled automatically, the brain processes more of that experience consciously and encodes more of it into retrievable memory. A meal eaten with full attention to its flavors and textures, a walk taken with genuine attention to the sensory details of the environment, a conversation engaged with full presence rather than divided attention. All of these produce more distinct, more richly encoded memories than their automatic counterparts. The time they occupy does not become longer by the clock, but the memories that result are denser, more distinct, and when recalled, reconstruct a felt duration that is longer than routine handling would have produced. There is something worth sitting with here that connects tonight's exploration to a theme running through several previous evenings on this channel. The perception of time, like the perception of the night sky, like the true scale of the asteroid belt, like the nature of a galaxy collision, turns out to be something quite different from what ordinary experience would suggest. What feels most obviously true, that time passes at a steady and uniform rate that the clock accurately captures, turns out, on examination, to be only a partial account of what is actually happening. The clock is accurate, and the felt experience of time is also accurate, in its own way, to something real about the density and novelty and dopamine richness of the experience it contains. Both are true simultaneously. They simply describe different things. The way the dark night sky and the universe full of microwave light are both true descriptions of the same sky, viewed through different instruments. Now gather the threads of tonight, the way previous evenings have gathered theirs. The first thread is about the distinction between measured time and experienced time. These are two genuinely different things. One tracked by clocks that are indifferent to everything human, and one constructed by a brain that is exquisitely sensitive to novelty, memory, dopamine, and the accumulated weight of all previous experience. The clock does not accelerate with age. The felt experience of time does. Both are accurately describing their respective domains. The second thread is about proportion. Each year of life represents a smaller fraction of total lived experience than the year before it. The brain measures duration partly by proportion, and as the denominator grows, each additional year becomes a smaller slice of the whole, producing a logarithmic compression that accelerates as total age increases. The mathematics of proportion are not the complete explanation, but they are a genuine and significant part of it. The third thread is about novelty and memory density. The brain encodes novel experiences deeply and familiar experiences shallowly. Childhood is rich with genuine novelty, and the memories of childhood are correspondingly dense and distinct, making those years feel long in retrospect. Adulthood, with its accumulated expertise and established routines, is processed more efficiently, with fewer deep encodings per calendar day, producing memories that are less dense and years that feel, in retrospect, shorter. The fourth thread is about neural state transitions. Research using brain imaging has found that older brains make fewer distinct transitions between processing states when experiencing the same continuous event as younger brains. Fewer transitions mean fewer internal landmarks, fewer distinct moments carved out of continuous time, and a felt duration that is compressed relative to what the clock recorded. The fifth thread is about dopamine. The brain's internal clock is regulated partly by dopamine, which is released abundantly in response to genuine novelty, and declines as novelty becomes familiarity. Lower dopamine activity speeds the internal clock, compresses felt duration, and contributes to the experience of time passing more quickly. As the proportion of genuinely novel experience in daily life decreases. The sixth thread is about memory reconstruction. The felt length of a past period is determined not by its clock duration, but by how many distinct, retrievable memories it produced. Dense memory produces felt length. Sparse memory produces felt brevity. The asymmetry between the felt length of a novel holiday and the felt brevity of a long routine month is this mechanism at work, accurately reporting the difference in memory density between the two periods. The seventh thread, and the gentlest, is about what can be done. The process is not reversible, but it is not fixed either. Novelty, attention, new skills, new places, new conversation, new ways of approaching the familiar. All of these move the brain back toward the more engaged, more deeply encoding state that produces richer memories and a felt sense of time that is fuller, denser, and less prone to the blurring compression that routine produces. The choice is not between youth and age. It is between autopilot and presence. And presence, at any age, tends to produce more of what time, looked back upon, feels full of. There is a quiet symmetry in arriving here. The sensation that time is accelerating, that the years are shortening, that December arrives again before January seems truly finished, is one of the most universally shared aspects of human experience, felt by virtually everyone who has lived long enough to compare their present to their past. And yet, its causes, when examined carefully, are not mysterious at all. They are the straightforward consequences of how a remarkably efficient biological system handles the shift from a world of genuine novelty to a world of established expertise, from a brain building its models of reality from scratch to a brain navigating a world it has already, in most essential respects, already understood. The years do not shorten. The felt experience of them does, as a faithful reflection of how much genuinely new territory they contained. And knowing this, understanding the mechanism well enough to see what produces the compression, is itself a kind of opening, a way of seeing the relationship between attention and time that suggests something practical and gentle. More presence, more novelty where it can be found, more deliberate attention to the particular texture of days that would otherwise blur together into a month indistinguishable from any other. None of this can give back what time has already taken, but it can make what time remains feel longer, richer, more distinct when it is looked back upon. None of this requires anything of you tonight. The brain continues its efficient work, processing the familiar with the speed that efficiency produces, occasionally flagging something genuinely new for the deeper encoding that richness of memory requires. The clock continues its indifferent ticking, measuring every hour with perfect equality, regardless of how full or empty the hour felt to the person inside it. And somewhere in the space between the clock and the felt experience, in the difference between what the calendar says and what the memory stores, the entire mystery of tonight's exploration continues to unfold, quietly, in every brain, across every life, as it always has. Let your breathing slow. Let the years that have already passed rest where they have come to rest. Some of them long and richly detailed in memory, some of them brief and blurred, all of them accurately reflecting, in their felt duration, the density of what they contained. Let the present moment, this particular moment, be what it is, available for as much or as little attention as tonight requires. Let the night do what the night has always done,